Well, do you use Twitter to find sources? And
No, and I have in the past. I don't currently. Like I said, I've kind of ixnayed it, but I'm sure I will have to get back into it unless the world explodes when this fellowship is over. And I'll probably end up trying to find a way where I can use it. The thing with Twitter, though, is you've got in any social media, it's not a one-way street. You can use it to find sources and find leads, but there's always this expectation that you're also, and especially if you're working for a magazine setting stories, there's this expectation that you're going to be also going out there. And what I've always struggled with is how do I put myself out in this medium in a way that I actually feel is genuine, authentic. And I say something on
3D.
Twitter, and I feel like, why the hell did I say that's not who I am? And before you know it, you've built a persona on the internet that's not you, or is you.
Whenever I show like a slightly quirky or offbeat side of myself, it's like negative 10 followers, like instantly, because people only follow me to hear earth science stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, but I mean,
Give people what they
I also
want.
just view it as a professional tool too. Like I'm not there to like show people my personality. I'm there to. It's in free advertising. That's how I see it. And unfortunately, as a freelancer, you have to kind of sell what you're working on.
Well, Stephen, you mentioned about how the expectation of not just writing, but taking photos and video and all that. Now, again, I've sort of been out of the day-to-day world of journalism for several years now, but certainly 10 years ago, that seemed to be the way things were going, is that everyone had to do everything, right? But that seemed to be changing back, that some organizations would send a photographer with the reporter, and you weren't expected to do the podcast. But do you guys feel like you need to have multimedia skills? Or you do?
Especially in TV, for sure. They want you to be what they call a predator. I kid you not, this is the word. They want you to be a producer, editor, and reporter.
That's so tacky. I love it.
And so they call it predator. Right? Talk about, like, that's just weird to say. But that's what they expect from you, and especially the younger you are, the more they expect from you to do that. Mainly because that's the way you quote unquote pay your dues. But then I found out that also then becomes your job description. So it's no longer an addendum to what you're doing. It is what you are paid to do.
Really? Well, the job description is not predator, I presume.
Yeah, and yes, you can see at it's like predator skills, recommended, or like, if you were a predator, what's it like, preferred, or I forget how they break it down. They're like your preferred skills versus desired skills.
Yeah.
Preferred, they want you to be a predator.
Proficiency in Word and predator.
Yes, you need to work some
That's how
nonlinear
I send
editing
email.
system. That's the thing, is that they expect, because the technology allows you to do the same thing. But again, back to what Elizabeth said earlier, it ends up, something's going to suffer along that line. Either your editing's going to suck, or your audio's going to suck, or your writing will be great and your pictures will be great. Maybe your reporting is great, but none of that great reporting will be seen if people drop off after 10, 30 seconds because you got a jump cut that just doesn't work,
Well, so for those of you for doing the magazine stuff, are you expected to bring video back? And
Not at legacy media. No, they're not asking writers to do that.
Nope. Yeah.
I need to
Nobody's
find
ever
one of those
asked me.
gigs.
So.
I have when I was in the Arctic. That's what I was up there doing, shooting video, photos, doing audio, and writing an article.
What was the outlet?
That was for the magazine I worked for. Yes.
Mhm.
And that was because it was a scrappy organization.
Yeah.
They were trying to do a lot with little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Favorite memory on a reporting story for everybody?
Favorite memory.
Yeah. Person you met.
The favorite person I met was, I had this incredibly lucky break. I was asked to write a profile of Edward L. Wilson, and he sort of changed my life because we went to a field
This
station.
is the Harvard ant expert and
Yes,
basically
the world's
biodiversity
foremost
expert.
myrmecologist. Yes, came up with a concept of sociobiology. But I went to Panama with him and spent time at the field station, and it was such a weird, incredibly interesting place that I thought that someday I have to come back here if I'm ever going to write a book. And 10 years passed.
Wow.
And I came up with my first book idea and went back there, and the book just changed my whole career. Well, writing the piece about Wilson turned me into an environmental writer. So he was a linchpin for me, and he blurbed my book, and he's
You blurbed your book, you said?
yeah.
And that's the Tapir's Morning Bath.
Very good, yes. So that's, meeting him and doing that piece, because I was not an environmental reporter before that, but the piece got a lot of attention. So, linchpin, yeah.
Favorite memories? Highlights?
Worst?
I'd say the
experience?
orangutan sanctuary that you mentioned earlier was a highlight. It was
That was on Borneo?
that was actually I think that was 10 years ago. That was a previous trip, and that was just an incredible place. I spent 3 days there with these orangutans just like crawling all over you, climbing all over you, and it was one of these experiences where it was like I simultaneously, like, I couldn't wait to get out of there. I was like, I have to leave here right now, and also like I don't ever want to leave, and I want to spend the rest of my life here, because it was so intense and amazing and upsetting and all that stuff. So it's not really a person, but it's close to a person.
I remember being up. I was up in Alaska, and it was like May, and it was like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and it was still pretty bright out, and the Chukchi Sea was totally frozen still. And I went out to get some photos. I think it was the last night that I was there, and so I was trying to grab some decent photos. And there was a bunch of women out on the ice. They were ice fishing sheefish. They had cut holes in the ice, and they were pulling it up, and they were using like old school, like Inupiaq fishing, which was basically a stick with a string. And they were just pulling fish out of there like there was no tomorrow. And there was gulls flying everywhere to come in and get at the innards and all the blood that was all over the place. And I walked up to them and asked them if I could take their picture, and they were really friendly, and they said sure. And actually, at one point, she got tired of killing fish, so she gave me the thing, and I did it for a while. And I remember I was asking her about something, and she I think I was really up in her face with the camera, and I said, like, I hope I'm not bothering you. And she says, oh no, I've done this for years, and I used to work in the tourism bureau here, and then people would come out. She said they went through a lot of Kodak back then.
Oh.
And I had this moment where I felt like being a journalist, sometimes you get kind of big on yourself, like I'm cool, I'm in this place doing this cool thing.
Right.
And then I realized like I'm doing the same thing that like hundreds of thousands of tourists do.
Yep.
And she just looks at me like another one of those. And that was really humbling and fun.
I get to go on a dinosaur dig in New Mexico, which is kind of like check off a 6-year-old like dream of mine. And this spring, I hiked up the Italian Alps with a paleontologist, where there's this castle halfway up the cliffs where on the ceiling there's dinosaur footprints. Because it used to be a tidal flat 235 million years ago, and got shoved up into the mountains when Africa crashed into Europe. So that was pretty mind blowing. That's probably the most interesting place I've been. Cool.
I would have to say most recently, I've been I got an assignment with a conservation news outlet called Manga Bay, and I ended up in Ethiopia. And actually, if you saw the flyer, it's that picture that I was, I'm carrying the wood. So there are these women in Ethiopia. It's one of the big crops is fuel wood. That's a big industry there, and the way they get this wood down the mountain, they can either use donkeys or these women. And I'm not trying to draw any comparisons or anything, but one of the ladies who I interviewed, been there for 80 years. I'm gonna say that she was 80 years old. She had been doing this for most of her life, and she used to carry this wood, and I've been up there several times on this mountain. I had to put it on myself and like really feel what these women are feeling, and it's still nothing compared to what they're feeling, because I walked maybe a mile and a half, maybe a mile. I'm not gonna say a mile and a half, maybe a mile, but down a mountain with about 150 pounds of wood on my back. And you look at it, and the bundle's no wider than this table, and maybe this high, and you're like, those are tiny twigs. How can that weigh anything? And you put it on your back, and you're like strapping it literally around your neck, and then you have to balance. That's the key, is that you have to find that balance, and you're walking down. Imagine coming down the cliffs over here at Flatirons with an unstable stack of wood, literally this long, down a mountain, and do that every day in jellies. All right, they're not wearing like hiking boots or anything like that. They're in like these cheap jelly shoes, and not that they're happy about it, but they have no other choice. And so meeting this one woman named Aragash Boka, she was 80 years old. Her retirement plan was to put down the wood and pick up leaves. So instead, she sweeps the leaves of the floor, packs them in a bag, in several bags actually, which are also very heavy, and she puts those on her back and carries those down the mountain instead of actual wood. So that's used as kindling for the fires that fuel the coffee pots and ovens of Addis. But it was a very humbling experience. Especially, I had this same moment when I was really just having like a magical moment in the forest at that point, because there's these huge eucalyptus trees, and due to how they grow, they're basically the only things that grow in the mountain. So it looks very uniform, very beautiful, but it's this beautiful destruction, really, because what you end up realizing is that the reason nothing else is growing on that floor is because it makes the soil acidic, so no undergrowth can come, and it halts the forest process in this mountain, thus reducing the water table. But these women were like, yeah, some guys just came like last week were filming us, you know, and I was like, oh man, okay, you know, like, well, they went from Manga Bay, you know, and so it was very humbling, but on a level that I'd never. And plus, it was my dream to report in Africa for years, and I finally realized that dream, and it's because of being here that I was able to do that. And it was a huge kind of like full circle moment, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing about this profession, right? When you actually get to be out in some bizarre place or meet people you'd never meet. I mean, 30 years ago, when I was starting out, I had the opportunity to go to Antarctica and stood at the South Pole, and that really, you know, spend 24 hours and watch the sun just go around in the sky.
Wow.
I felt like I was on another planet, and that really kind of solidified that this is a great job.
Yeah.
This is a great job.
Yeah, I think you can't go back once you've done some lot.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, bring it down a notch.
Yeah.
There's such a divide in our country right now, and in the media that's being ingested. You could say one being truth, one being fake news, and that's partly fueling this divide. But do you feel like with this environmental journalism that you're doing, that it's you trying to reach across that divide? Is it futile, or is it, or how do you reach across that divide?
Well, I assume, like, particularly with climate change, there's maybe, because, yeah, I mean, you, like Peter, I mean, there are still a lot of people who think this whole climate change thing is a hoax.
Yeah. One of the stories I wrote was I drove across the country with a former oil geologist who, from his geology research, sort of renounced his former life as an oil geologist because he came to realize how scary it was based on these ancient climate events, and actually studied the biggest mass extinction of all time, which is was this thing called the end Permian mass extinction, where tons of CO2 went into the air from volcanoes burning through coal, basically. And that was like a strategic choice to pick this guy to write about, because a lot of people, as soon as they hear climate change, they have their mind made up and they're completely unpersuadable. And I was trying to say, look, here's a guy who probably comes from a similar background and thought similarly, but by studying the rocks and sort of encountering the science, changed his mind. So maybe this is a way to change other people's minds. So that was a story that I wrote that was specifically designed to sort of persuade people who might not otherwise be persuadable.
You think it did? Is there any way to measure the impact?
I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah.
I have other strategies too. So, like, generally talking about ocean acidification, because there aren't preset talking points already out there.
Right.
If someone's like is just totally unpersuadable about climate change, and you're like, well, here's this thing that's just basic ocean chemistry, which is that if too much CO2 reacts with seawater, it makes it more acidic, and it's really bad for things that build their shells out of carbonate to stick around. So it's going to be really bad for coral reefs and plankton and stuff in like the coming decades. They don't have a set of talking points yet, and so they sort of like sit back and you can maybe persuade them that it's pretty scary. Whereas climate change, a lot of people, yeah, it's hard to change their mind.